guest curator. He's the one who had the idea for this exhibition. He wrote a great little pamphlet on Windsor Cycling History that is for free, and we have copies available here, so if you're interested, you can take some home with you tonight. His background is actually law. He is a law professor at the University of Windsor. He was the Dean of Law for more than one opportunity during his career there, and his specialty is cycling and the law. So it's kind of an interesting profession and hobby of his that developed into this exhibition. He reached out to us and said, hey, I wrote this great pamphlet, I've done this great research, I think we would make a great exhibition. Can we do something here at the museum? We said yes. I looked at the collection. We had 2 cycling related artifacts in our collection. We had a license plate and we had a badge from a Girl Scout cycling badge that we got. So not a lot of items. So I said, we're happy to do it, but we don't have the items. We have to find those items. So he went out into the community, talked to his contacts, got information from people he knew, and found a collector in Amherstburg. I'm going to point out to a poster right here, the Vintage Ontario Vintage Bicycle Show. So Mark McGuire, you can see his email there, mark.mcguire@gmail.com. He has basically his home. He built a barn on his property, a shed that he stores over 100 vintage CCM bicycles that he has collected throughout his years, restores and keeps there. And every year he does a bicycle show on his property. He's got a nice property, 2 acres land in Amherstburg, and people come from all over southern Ontario, from the States, show off their bicycles, buy and sell. So he gave us, of the bicycles you're going to see, 90% come from his collection that belong to us, which is great. We appreciate very much for having Mark involved. So we got the items for the bicycles. We also reached out to a few museums. So some of the bikes you're going to see, I'll point out this bike and the Penny Farthing here, are actually from Ingenium Museum in Ottawa, so the Museum of Science and Technology in Ottawa. They loaned us these bicycles for this exhibition, along with a few other artifacts you can see in the cases that I'll point out. So along with the bikes, these items, we got some great cycling related racing items from Aldo Stalchin, who's been involved with the Erie Street Bicycle Race since almost its inception in 1958. So we've got, you can see some racing posters, some interesting amateur racing licenses, ephemera, pamphlets and things like that. And then right above that, believe it or not, Windsor is home to a former Olympian in cycling, Kellyanne Way. So she participated in both the Barcelona and Seoul, Korea Olympics. We've got some of her medals that she was awarded at those Olympics. And she, you can see there, anybody who's familiar with cycling and kind of Tour de France and that kind of aspect, to the left here is the yellow jersey. That's awarded to somebody who wins a heat or a section of the race during the Tour de France. She's the first North American male or female to win that and get that award. And she's loaned that to us for this exhibition as well, along with her national team racing jersey. So all of these things combined, along with photographs from the community, information by Dr. Christopher Waters, and the curation from him, we've created this exhibition. So we're very proud of it. It's really a community effort. It shows what the community can come together and do. So as a museum, we do our best to collect what we think might be relevant for the future, based on what bring us, but by no means do we have an exhaustive list or exhaustive access to everything. So without the community support, we couldn't do exhibitions like this, but it goes to show you that there are a lot of great resources out there if we get the time, energy, and the right people to bring those things here at the museum. So that's kind of the spiel of the exhibit as a whole. I'm going to walk through and showcase some of the more interesting pieces here and kind of go through that history, okay? So we're going to start here with a velocipede. This, as I mentioned, is on loan from Ingenium, the Museum of Science and Technology in Ottawa. This is the oldest bike that we've got in the collection, 1867 on display right now. It's a very interesting bike if you take a look at it. It's a completely metal frame. Everything is metal, including the seat. The wheels are made of wood, and the tire is a metal rim around that wood tire. There is no rubber missing from this bike. This is how the bike would have been presented as far as we're aware. It has the nickname, or was affectionately called, Bone Shaker, as you can imagine. So imagine you're in France, you know, a very big bicycling city in the 1800s, and you're on those cobblestone streets driving this bike. You're going to be bouncing pretty hard, and you're not going to feel that great unless you put something under your seat for padding, right? You can see the biking, or the braking mechanism, I should say, is just the string, which is attached to a lever down here. So as you pull the string, the metal hits the metal, and that's to slow you down. So if that string breaks, good luck. You're just hoping that you don't hit anything before you crash, I guess.
You have a couple of spare strings with you just in case.
That's it, on the fly, doing something, right? So you can kind of see this is kind of, even in the 1860s, the design of the bike is very similar to a modern day bike, right? They haven't changed all that much. Most bicycles follow that biped, the two-wheel situation. This would have been a single gear bike. There's no changing gears, right? The chain connecting the single gears would have just propelled it with your own manpower or power to ride the bike, I should say. And it's a great, interesting look at what you can do with bicycles. And if we look at the next bike I'm going to point out, which is the high wheeler or the penny farthing bike here, this is actually 1887. So it's actually a newer bike than this bike here, even though it has a look like you'd think would be older. And the innovative part of this bike is the larger front wheel and the smaller back wheel. So it's nicknamed the penny farthing because of the size of the wheels, right? Penny farthing are two different sizes.
How do you climb up onto that to ride it?
Great question. I have
carefully.
No idea how to do it. Apparently they did.
Very
Carefully.
This is also a fixed wheel. So again, there's only one gear. As you pedal, there's no switching gears, there's no up and down. But because it's got a larger wheel, you could actually go faster in one of these than you could in a traditional fixed gear bike like that. Because the same amount of energy to pedal makes that tire move more as a larger tire. So you can actually go faster under your own power, right?
Covers more ground too.
Covers more ground, exactly. Which is great. The only problem is when you try to brake, right? If you're sitting directly almost over the axis here, X wheel, if you brake too fast or you're going down a hill or you hit a bump, you're going head over this bike right there. There's not much to protect you. Unlike a bike like that, which is at least lower to the ground, this would definitely, you'd knock your head on this, you wouldn't be getting up for a week or two for sure. But it can go and show you that even though it's a different design from the Velocipede and from other bikes, it's similar in style, right? We're still looking at two wheels, we're still looking at a seat being propelled by your own power, fixed to your kind of
That seat's interesting. That's a leatherette, so to speak.
Yeah, exactly. And it would have a little bit of bounce. So you can see it's even designed so that if you're sitting on it, the weight would come on the back but not affect the wheel, right? So you're not, your weight isn't affecting how fast you can turn it. So a little bit of suspension there, and that suspension is also going to give you when you're riding, right? So if it's stiff enough and you're not pushing right down, as you ride, you've got that little wiggle room to kind of break up some of the monotony, or break up some of the hardness of riding on the ground. You'll notice they do have a rubberized tire in some of these things that you can see, so it makes it a little bit better than the full metal with wooden wheel and metal rim. But still by no means a smooth ride. And again, as I already mentioned, I have no idea how to get off or on this. If you're stopping at a crossing or pedestrian or whatever, I don't know how you don't fall over. So,
You have to be 6'6" to get up on that.
yeah, there would have definitely been some ways and maybe some stations to set up, but I'm not sure. I haven't done enough research on the high wheeler myself, so I'm not too sure.
And is there a brake on that one?
There is a brake. I believe it's a back pedal brake, so it's
Okay.
similar to just doing it that way. As far as I'm aware, but I could be wrong with that. But there was a way to brake with these. And same idea. You just hope that it was nice and slow, so you didn't fall any way around.
I don't think I want to try that one.
If you look above, we've got a picture from a similar time period, 1897. This is in Walkerville. It doesn't show a high wheeler, but it does. You can take a look. You can see a lot of bicycles in this crowd, right? You can see a bicycle here that's been decorated. There's 2 or 3 over here, another one there, some over here that are being held. And this is to showcase that before Windsor was the Motor City, right? It was a cycling city, and that plays on the exhibition title, Windsor Cycling City. We are trying to make that comparison directly, that long before the automobile was here, people were cycling, and people are still cycling.
It's a wheel town. It's always been a wheel town.
It's a wheel town. It's a transportation town. So this just shows you kind of how people were using bicycles as a regular basis during these periods in our history, right? If we point out these case over here, we've got some interesting retail-related items. So you can see the different kind of carbine and different lanterns or lights that could have been used on older bikes on the top. Flight is a CCM model, which we'll see a bit later. You can see an advertisement there. We've actually got a calendar that, again, believe it or not, is on loan from Ingenium in Ottawa, for Norm Cycle Shop, which is in Windsor, Ontario. So they actually had that in their collection they lent us borrow for this exhibition.
It was at the corner of Walker and Calderwood.
I believe you. I trust
Yeah.
you there. Yeah.
Yeah.
So you can kind of
It says
see.
right there.
It says right there.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Well, no, it doesn't say.
Well, because I lived at 3619 Bing, which was
Yeah.
2 blocks
But
over.
it's got the address,
There you go.
3603 block.
Memories.
And we can see there's a the black book on the second shelf there is actually a ledger from Norm Cycle Shop as well, which is showing people who bought the bikes, when they bought the bikes, what bikes they bought, et cetera, et cetera.
Uh-huh.
We've got some great CCM countertop advertisements there on the right. We've got a skirt lifter here, as well as a pants clip, so you can clip your
To this day, I use those.
See, so when you don't get mud and dirt on your
We used
legs when you're
elastic bands.
bicycling. We've got some great documents here during the Second World War, during the rationing. So bikes had to apply for special, or producers I should say, and retailers for special permits to be able to sell bikes because they had materials in them that were being used for the war, right? Rubber, things like that, right? So you can see some documentation here as well. And then a few photographs, I should say, drawings showcasing some of the fashion associated with biking, right? So you've got some ladies' biking pants here. You've got some children and ladies' clothing for the biking era down here. So it's kind of neat to see some of those things.
Kurt, they had to have special biking clothing, and just the way that people wear the special biking clothing now to be.
Exactly. And bicycles too. We have a little section, sorry, right over here about step through and step over bicycles. So step through is what we would have called a lady's bike. Step over would be a man's bike, right? The idea in the design, the step over, you're stepping over the top bar to get on the other side of the bike. Step through, you're stepping through without the bar.
Because the woman's wearing a skirt.
Exactly. So this would have given more space for skirts, for dresses that women might have been wearing, so they're not getting stuck or held up on that crossbar right there. So today it's step through and step over, but if you're thinking about those terms, ladies and men's, women and male bikes, that's kind of the more modern term for those styles of bikes. So as we enter the exhibition, this is where we get all that great bicycling nostalgia. So as I mentioned, if you rode a bike anytime between 1930 and 1960, you're going to see a style of bike here that you might find familiar. We've set this up in chronological order the best we can. So the earliest bike, aside from the two from Ingenium, is a CCM flight from 1937. These bikes, most of them, except for the ones I point out as I go through, are on loan from Mark McGuire in Amsterdam.
Thank you, Mark.
These are his CCM bikes, and these are just a sampling. As I said, there are probably hundreds of bikes in his barns, all different models and shapes. So interesting about the CCM flight, you can see some advertisement here as well as some schematics. This would have been, at the time, was marketed as kind of an exciting suspension aerodynamic kind of bike, right? So it's designed with these kind of hooked front and rear rails, we'll call them, that would have given added suspension as you're driving without the need for springs that you would think of on a modern day suspension. You can see the bike itself, the seat has some springs underneath it, so you're giving, again, more suspension on your ride that's coming through. It's got a nice wide handlebar. You can see the beautiful paint job that's, as far as we know, as far as I'm aware, is original to the bike. You can see the great metal CCM logo right on the front here as well. And these bikes were adopted by a lot of railway companies. So they would be used for messenger bikes. So people are unloading and bringing things off and onto the railway and use these kind of bikes to bring those back and forth.
It has a bit of the streamlined look from that era as well,
It
too.
does. It very does. That Art Deco, very looking, very much so. Kind of streamlined suspension. At the time, this would have been a very cutting-edge kind of bike design, right? So again, we're looking at the same style designs, but these little tiny changes are kind of what's changing through bike design as we move through. So as we keep coming up in time, we're in the 1940s now. This is an example of what would be common commuter-style bike in the 1940s. So very similar look, not as aerodynamic. We don't have those front suspension, those rims. We still have a seat with suspension here. This, you can see we've got a light for nighttime riding. So it is a friction light. If you come on the other side, you can see where the wheel turning when engaged would generate the friction, generate the movement to create the light. We've got a toolbox so you can repair if you run into any trouble. A pump, so if you're getting your flat tire, you can pump up your bike here. And then the back luggage carriage back here. So this is he purposely used a lunchbox because a lot of people working in the factories in the 1930s, 40s, 50s in Windsor would have been using this as their main transportation to get around town or to get to work. So they bring their lunch with them, they bring their groceries with them, and they use this kind of style bike or bikes like this during that time period. So similar look, you can see a little bit different design elements. Again, this is a CCM bike. You can see the nice CCM logo. It's got some interesting rails coming off the top to support the right in front of the wheel here. And as I mentioned, it's got a beautiful lunch box on the back. Moving up, 1942, this is a step through or a woman's style bike. Again, more room here. You've got a chain guard on this one, so we're not getting your pant leg or in this particular case, potentially a skirt or dress stuck in the turning gears here. Again, these are all that we've seen so far are fixed gear, single gear. There is no gear changing on these bikes, right? A pretty basic design for the time, a great color job. This one's interesting because it includes a Massey Harris logo. So Massey Harris is one of the companies that was amalgamated into CCM, Canadian Cycling Motor, at one point, but they still branded these bikes as Massey bikes, right? So you can kind of see the neat different head badge here when you take a look at that. Similar design again. It's got some great fenders, and you got a little reflector in the back here, as I mentioned, the guard, and just kind of a great vintage looking bike that you may be riding through. If we take a look at the back wall before we move on, we can see a great advertisement for CCM Bicycle. The whole family is riding CCM, right? Jump on board. We've got information about commuting by bike in Windsor. So as I mentioned, you can see a photograph of, I can't pronounce their French name from here, but Plumber's company in Windsor, who you can see 2 or 3 bikes out front. That's how the workers would have gotten to work, right? To the right, the image is cut off. You can see the wheel of a horse and carriage next to it. So those were kind of your 2 main ways of transportation. So the bike was much more affordable and easier than trying to arrange a horse, a carriage, and all that kind of stuff, right? We're going to get to the Made in Windsor in a second. We can see a picture here from 1919. Alfred Career is in front of his home riding his bike. And the style is very similar. If you look at the 1919 and the 1940, the handlebar, you can see that crossbar on both, are very similar design. So even though they're separated by 20 years, you're seeing the design of bike isn't changing all that much, right? There's these minute changes, but the actual form of the bicycle stays pretty consistent as we're moving through. Got a kiddie car or a style bike here. This little child here has got a 3-wheel bike. This is another Windsor photograph right in front of our tricycle section. So CCM also made tricycles, which you can see on display here. Mostly 3-wheelers. Again, the design doesn't change all that much throughout history. This is a really smart looking tricycle with your wagon attachment, so you can bring all your toys and all your stuff as you're riding around town on your nice tricycle here. This is a Sunshine tricycle, I believe made in the Waterloo region, but part of the CCM collection that Mark has. And we're going to shift our focus for a second to this bike here. This is, if you look at it, a relatively unassuming bike. It looks a lot like the other bikes, maybe a bit simple. There's not much ornamentation on it. There's not much interesting looking design on it from another bike. But this is one of the, in my opinion, most important bikes in this exhibition, and was one of the hardest bikes to get. This bike was wheeled in. We opened up on Saturday, March 18th. Thursday, 2 days before, we finally got this bike in here. So it took from that time to find somebody with one of these bikes and loan it to us. What is this bike? This is an Evans and Dodge bicycle, or an bicycle. As you hear, Evans and Dodge, as in the Dodge brothers, who went on to create the Dodge Motor Company, along with Henry Ford and the Dodge car. Before they were building cars, they were building and designing bicycles.
Where?
Here.
Right here in Windsor, Ontario. This bike was built at the foot of Oled Avenue, not too far from here, in around 1897. So this is not only an amazing part of bicycling history, it's an amazing part of auto history in general, right? The Dodge brothers, whose brand still exists today, who's still innovating today, are getting their bearings, we'll say, or getting their start building bicycles, right? And building bicycles here in Windsor, Ontario, of all places. So you can see from the signs here, we've got an ad for the Evans and Dodge that came from the Evening Record, the Windsor Evening Record. You can see them advertising this new bikes, and you can kind of see the history of Windsor tied in with this bicycle here.
So are the Dodge Canadian or American?
They were Americans coming to Windsor and building in Windsor and going back to Michigan and Detroit as well. So they ended up working for Henry Ford. The Evans and Dodge was eventually sold to CCM, so it became part of the CCM branding, though they didn't keep the E&D Maple Leaf brand. And after they sold to CCM, the Dodge brothers went and started working for Henry Ford and started designing cars instead. So literally, one of the last things they did before they got into the auto industry was to build this bike and design this bike here, right? So it's a great piece of history here. This bike comes from Elmira, Ontario. We got it on loan from Walter Pline, who has this in his collection. There are not many of these bikes left. As soon as the exhibit went up, we actually got an email from a museum in Michigan who has Evans and Dodge bikes, and they said, we've only found a few. So they actually are gonna come and take a look at this bike so they can add information in different styles to their own collection there. So it's a great piece of history and a great piece of Windsor's history. So literally until 2 days before the exhibit opened, we didn't even know if we'd have it here, but we were trying for quite a while. So we're very happy to have it here, and it's a great piece of history.
The frame and the fork style and everything are so much, and the coaster,
Yeah,
like,
It's very similar.
today.
What they did, when was innovative about the E&D bike that the Dodge brothers provided was a different bearing system for the turning. I can't explain it exactly. I'm not as familiar with the mechanics of bicycle, but they revolutionized this bearing that made it a smoother ride, apparently, or that was what they advertised at the very least. And when they got that patent, they started building these bikes specifically to sell. And they only sold, not for a very long time. I can't remember exactly, early 1890s until about the end of the 1890s. So that 10-year period or so is kind of when they're doing this. But right here in Windsor, Ontario, which is phenomenal.
And there's another set of bicycle makers who did pretty well in the world.
Who'd that be?
The Wright brothers.
The Wright brothers, there you go. And
More bicycle, but they went a different way.
exactly, but you're kind of seeing, right?
Bicycle makers, the
All
mindset.
this transportation is coming out of these ideas. What we have at the time, right? It's very good. So we're going to keep going up in time. I'm going to point out Dr. Waters' pamphlet, as I mentioned. So if anybody's interested, please grab these either now or on your way out. This section here is mostly for children, but anybody can kind of, play with it. You get the card and the spoke to kind of make the sound. You can honk and play with all the bells and whistles on the handlebars here. So we'll keep moving up. This is a 1943 bike. And what's interesting about this CCM is it's a wartime bicycle, Second World War, right? So you can see that it is different in its materials than some of the other bikes because of that wartime production.
blocks.
So instead of metal foot pedals, we've got wooden foot pedals on the bike here. Instead of rubber handles, we've got leather handles on the book here. Instead of a nice metal decal, it's actually a sticker decal now that CCM is putting on their bikes, right? So all of these little changes are because materials that are like this, rubber, some metals, are being rationed for the war effort, right? So it was still important to get people on bicycles. That was still the main kind of transportation for a lot of people, but how they built the bicycle had to change slightly during the war effort. So it's a great bike to kind of see that style and to see the innovation that's happening to make bicycles still producible and manufacturable during that war. You can see here about the Canadian Cycle Motor. I mentioned the companies that came together to create CCM, or that CCM bought up. So you can see Wellandale Manufacturing, Gould Bicycle, Massey Harris, Granderson NFG, and H.A. Lozier are coming together to make CCM, and they're also purchasing other bikes as time goes on as well to make this big brand. So people kind of think of CCM today as this Canadian Tire brand, right? It is owned by Canadian Tire, the name for CCM, and they kind of still make CCM bikes, but in all honesty, they're not the greatest bikes today, right? CCM went bankrupt in around 1981, and at that point sold their name to Canadian Tire, which is then licensing that name to produce bikes. But these CCMs built before that time period are specialty quality made bikes. These have been sold in specialty bicycle shops, not in necessarily department stores, and they were creating and innovating throughout that time period. So there's a big difference between modern day CCM and kind of historic vintage CCM that we're looking at today, and you can see as you're going through this here. So we got 1948 standard. This is another step through. So again, similar looking in design. It still has the kind of chain guard or the gear guard. Back to rubber at this point for the handles. Metal wheels again, or metal, I should say, pedals at this point. Another nice looking bike. Not too much difference in design. We're going to point out the 1951 motorbike. So this bike is very similar to the other motorbike in 1940 that we looked at over there. The difference being, again, that this is kind of a little bit of a nicer model, a slightly different design if you look across to the commuter bike across there, you see the differences. But it's an interesting part of this bike and why they called it a motorbike. By the 1950s, and you can see from these photographs we have here, cars are a thing now, right? People are driving cars, car culture has developed. And one of the arguments that the guest curator makes here, and that we kind of showcase in the exhibition, is that as the popularity of the car rises, the focus changes from a cycling culture to a driving culture. And a lot of the legislation, laws, bylaws that are coming out are favoring motorists over cyclists, right? So cyclists are no longer having the same access to driving on the roads, on the pathways. Motor cars and are now taking that precedence. They now have the right of ways in a lot of these places. They are now getting funding. And a lot of things that the companies did is they market these kind of bikes as a motorbike style, right? So it's, again, it's playing off that motorized aspect. Even though bikes have been around well before that, they're kind of playing to that. You'll notice a license plate. This is another area that is a byproduct of vehicles, right? So after the car is happening and people are licensing for cars, they are trying to push licensing onto bicycles now as a way to control, potentially to limit access to some of these bicycles to, again, give more precedence, more access to the motor car instead of the bicycle. So there's a few more hurdles they're putting up now on cyclists in favor of motorcycle. And they're trying to apply some of those motorcycle laws to cycling in a similar way, right? So it's an interesting competition between cycling and automobiles that the 1950s is kind of definitely starting to showcase, and these bikes kind of showcase that.
You actually had to have a license on your bicycle to,
Yes.
to put a bicycle on the road?
Yes, to have a bike, you need a bike license, right?
remember
Even
that.
you, the one that you brought
Well,
today,
I brought
right?
it today, but I didn't need it to. That was actually so if it were stolen, it could be recoverable.
Okay, so
That
you'll
was-
see a few here too.
Yeah, there's a few of those there.
Yeah.
That's why I brought this, because I didn't think it was actually I didn't have to license it to have it on the road.
At one point you did.
I hear
had
you.
to license your bicycle, and that's a byproduct of the auto industry.
I connect those dots. Gotcha.
So you can kind of see here too, kind of neat, just interesting feature. It's just a flashlight holder for your light now, right? So kind of a neat little thing. Bring your own flashlight, turn it off and on. Now you've got a bike light, right? So it's kind of a cool concept. And these were designed to look more like motorcycles. And this isn't the first motorbike style model. The 1940 commuter bike that we talked there is also a motorbike style. You can see it's CCM motorbike. This is just an updated version about 10 years later. You can kind of see the design elements, how they change, or bring in some of those licensing elements now too. We keep moving up. These are more modern. These might be more familiar with some of you. This is a 1967. So interesting because the centennial year, CCM made a centennial bike. This is a centennial bike. You can see the Canadian Centennial logo on the back and the front plate here, the maple leaf that was used for the centennial. Beautiful kind of, you call that burnt orange design, sparkle design that go with it, and kind of just a neat part of a bike that's connected to our Canadian history again, right? So CCM's Canadian company is showcasing some of that heritage here. We've got along the wall some great advertisements. You can see Serve the Nation, as I mentioned, the war effort bikes. You can see ladies, mostly women, are at the home front during this time, and they're the one being the main consumer now of bicycles, right? So their advertising is generating specifically for females during this time, so that great CCM logo there. You can see some interesting aspects regarding cycling the law, tourism, another great CCM ad. So kind of idea that farmers will be using CCM bicycles on their farms for different purposes like that. Yeah. A great every child's dream of spring is bicycling, right? So another great color CCM ad we've got there. And as we look to the right, These two bikes here are not from the collection, Mark McGuire's collection. These were donated from residents who let us borrow this for the exhibition. This is a Columbia here. This is an American-made bike that was restored by the owner in the 1960s. It kind of showcases some of the luxury that's coming into bikes, right? So you can kind of see it's a similar motorcycle design. It's got even the replica of the gas tank between the top and the middle bar, right? To mimic a motorcycle, the handlebars, the light on the front, the chromed out light, the design in general are kind of matching that. This is as an example of what an American company is making. And if we keep going here, we've got two Schwinn bikes. Again, American producers, not CCM bikes. And this 1955, anybody who grew up in the 50s or around the 50s, this was the Cadillac of children's bicycles. If you were a kid in the 1950s, this is the bike you wanted. I want this bike now looking at this bike, right? It's gorgeous. It's got the motorcycle design again. It's got the faux gas tank kind of elements here. It's got the chain guard. You've got tassels. You've got suspension. Look at this beautiful chrome and built-in light in the chrome bumper here at the front and the back. You've got the stand on the back for your luggage. It is just, if you were a kid riding this bike in 1955, no one could touch you, right? This was the be-all and end-all.
Speedometer.
It's got a speedometer on it as well. I don't know if that's 1950s, but at some point added on there. And then we've got a Schwinn from the 1960s here. This is more what we call an everyday bike versus the 1955 high-end kind of desirable bike. This is only 5 years later. This was actually purchased by a local resident, Nancy Moran. She bought this bike. She saved up her bicycling money in 1963, she said, and she bought this bike off of a friend. And she had it, and it's been the family ever since. And she rode it every day of her childhood into her teenage years, kind of idea. And this is to kind of showcase how important bikes have been and still are to some people as a means of getting around. And especially as a kid, as exploring your community, exploring your neighborhood, this is one of the best ways to do it.
She's the former heritage officer for Windsor too.
One and the same, Nancy. Yes. So she actually reached out to us with this Schwinn. It now belongs to her daughter Annette, who agreed to let us use it on Nancy's behalf here. But a nice, beautiful bike. Similar idea. You can kind of see beautiful chrome still. You can notice with this bike, this is a multi-gear bike, right? So now we've got at least 3 gears here. I think there might be 1 or 2 in the front.
2 in the front, and I can't count. At least 4 in the back. I can't tell exactly.
Yeah, so we're looking at a 7 or 8 gear bike here, which is great. These are making transportation a lot easier. This is accommodating the different landscape that we're getting now, right? People biking roads, hills, things like that, but they might need a better gear to help doing that. And this kind of represents it. This is the most modern bike that we've had in the exhibit in 1960. But still, you'll see these bikes on the road today still, right? These are bikes built completely in metal parts, chromed out fenders, and these last. There's no carbon fiber here. These are not light. We brought all these in from the front when we came here. I was tired of bringing 8 bikes, even using one wheel, lifting the back up because they were on their stands here. They're heavy bikes. They're completely metal construction, a lot of these things, and they last quite a bit. So that's kind of it. You can see some interesting ad campaigns that Bike Windsor Essex has done that let us borrow. So this is from a few years ago now, but the idea that they're trying to get people still into bicycling, still using bicycling as a means of transportation. And in today's, where there's concerns about our emissions, pollution, climate change, no more relevant are bikes today than they were in the 1950s and the 1890s, right? They're still a great way to get around, and they're environmentally friendly way to get around. You're not creating any emissions. You're exercising your own body, you're burning your own fat, you're exercising as you use these bikes. That's a great way of transportation. So Bike Windsor Essex is showcasing kind of idea that we can still use bikes today. These are still a relevant way to get around our city, and we can do more as a city to promote bicycling and to promote bicycling culture in Windsor to make our roads safe for kids to drive on and adults. Because I would love to bicycle, but there's no way I could bicycle down Oled Avenue or Tecumseh Road, right? These are main thoroughfares in our community that are not bike friendly, where they could be. If we had different policy, if we had different investment in biking culture here, they might be able to be that way, right? So this exhibition kind of showcases, and I hope you enjoyed it, kind of a a walk through cycling history in Windsor, and there's still lots to go. We can still keep evolving the cycling, we can keep growing our cycling culture. So I hope you enjoyed it. I want you guys to take a look around. I'm gonna go and prepare our meeting section for some snacks and things like that for the second part.
There is no bike for two.
There's no two tandem bike, not in this display. Though, has anybody ever ridden a tandem bike, like a two-seater?
Councillor Holt
bike?
had
I
one.
couldn't do. I don't know how you do. What's the experience like? If you don't mind
I
sharing?
think I fell off. It was so awkward because I think even with my wife, who's pretty capable, I don't think we did very well. I think we sort of gave
You
up.
had to be in sync.
Yeah, that's the problem,
Me
right?
and her?
Cycling at the same time.
Well,
Work with me on this.
Well, they had a child, so
They've
they
got a
missed
lot
it.
of great bikes. I've seen them in Detroit as well, like the group bikes that you can now ride, where they're like
Oh,
six
yeah,
or 7
I've seen
people who are
that.
pedaling, and there's like usually
Yeah.
there's a bar or something, and stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's kind of neat to kind of see
Yeah.
those aspects of cycling. Nothing for this exhibit, but they're definitely out there. They definitely exist. So yeah, and then I just mentioned the last case we didn't kind of look at. A lot of CCM ephemera, advertisement, a few more bicycling licenses, tools that would have been used for bicycling. There's a repair kit for your rubber there, a few of the tags as well, and just kind of general advertisement for CCM related products. So
You asked about the one I brought. See, this one actually has the person's address on it. Like my ad has an
Yeah.
address. That's the yellow one. The orange one just has a date and
Yep.
a number. Mine had my address, my name and address.
gotcha. So as you mentioned, in case it gets
In case
stolen
it
or
could be
lost.
identifiable.
Yeah, that's pretty neat.
I don't know if I ever kept I should have kept a record of the registration number,
Yeah.
which I don't know.
Do you still have the bike from that time, or is that long
No,
gone?
that's long.
1970?
No, that would have been one of these, because in 1969 I bought a 10-speed,
Okay.
but I might even put this on that, because in 1969 I still lived in that house.
Yeah. Pretty neat. There you go. So does everybody have this? Do these remind you of bikes you may have grown up with, or you remember your
the
parents
trike
having?
does.
The trike does. Yeah. So you were not a cyclist too much after that.
And that one does too, with the fatter tire.
Yes.
The one we have.